Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here. My beard is gone, and it's time for a review of the debut album from Gryffin, Gravity. Dan Griffith, aka Gryffin, is an American EDM artist specializing in the spheres of melodic bass and house music. Griffith began picking up a lot of steam around 2015 with remixes for artists like Maroon 5, Years and Years, Tove Lo. With well over 10 million monthly listeners on Spotify, Gryffin is undoubtedly a key player in the modern EDM landscape. That much is undeniable. In terms of melodic bass artists, I'm pretty sure the only person getting more streams is Illenium, and this is the point in the video where I usually talk about how I was introduced to the artist, what elements of their music caught me on and made me start following them more closely, but I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I haven't really listened to that much of Gryffin's stuff. In fact, prior to this album's release, really the only music that I had heard from Gryffin, with exception to some of his early remixes, which I may have listened to once or twice but didn't really remember much from, was Feel Good, the collaboration with Illenium and Dea. I guess I can't even say I fully understood the scope of how big of an artist Gryffin is until Gravity dropped and I started looking into some of his stats. It is very strange and almost shocking to me that everything Gryffin has put out post Feel Good has just completely gone under my radar, because typically when I like a song, and even when I don't like a song, sometimes I pay attention to loads of different artists and, keep up with the music, just try to get a taste for what kind of stuff is coming out. But I really didn't hear much about Gryffin putting out any original music, and it's insane because the stream numbers he's getting are just massive. Not once did a friend or colleague of mine ever hit me up, give me a nudge and say, hey, you should check out this new Gryffin song. It just never happened. Prior to Gravity, I don't think I've ever really gotten any requests to review his music, and if I did, they were very, very few and far between. So I was really caught off guard, first of all, that this album even existed, because I guess I hadn't really listened to any of his original music, like I said, other than Feel Good, prior to the release of this thing. LPs in dance music, I'd say, are a pretty rare occurrence in the grand scheme of things, and an even more rare occurrence for artists who are known more for their remixes. So yeah, Gravity definitely came out of left field for me, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to give the people what they want and review this album. While the circumstances aren't exactly preferable to me, I definitely like to have more of a background history with an artist, a familiarity with their discography. So fair warning, this review is obviously going to be a bit different than usual, but I'm excited to dig into it nonetheless. Feel like I'm coming from a pretty unbiased perspective, obviously, for one, because I haven't listened to much of Gryffin's music in the past, and for two, because I didn't hear any of the songs leading up to the album. I got to experience the full thing all at once, no interruptions, no previous singles or anything like that. I went into Gravity with absolutely no expectations of what I was or wasn't going to get on the project. I honestly didn't even really look into the track list of this album other than maybe a quick glance. So yeah, going into this thing, my ears were completely, fresh, with absolutely no, preconception of what exactly I was going to get out of this album. To start out, I guess I'd say that my initial experience with this album was not a super positive one. Gravity is nearly an hour in length and honestly filled to the brim with the types of EDM that I feel like I've heard a million times at this point, whether on EDM radio or suggested tracks or in the context of somebody's album, EP, etc. On my first listen, I failed to really find a connecting thread that ties all of the music of Gravity together, and in fact, I couldn't really even hear any kind of signature Gryffin sound that made him stand out over any other EDM artist. More specifically, reminded me a bit of projects like Cascade's Automatic, Tritonal's Painting with Dreams, and of course, Illenium's Awake. In other words, feel-good electropop projects that don't necessarily see their respective artists at their best, weaving in a lot of quote-unquote trendy elements, and that's honestly pretty much how I felt about Gravity as well, except in the case of Gryffin, there wasn't really a signature sound that I could kind of tie everything back into and reference. To me, just felt like this culmination of everything I had heard in popular EDM over the last few years. However, on my second, third, fourth listens of this album, I really started to notice smaller details that made me appreciate the project more. Started to notice Griffith's subtle use of guitar in nearly every song, some seriously detailed production, layers of percussion and other instruments that play in the background and fill out the frequency spectrum really nicely. I also just started to realize there's not a whole lot I can really complain about when it comes to Gravity. Probably the worst thing that I could say about it is that it's an average EDM album, not much more and not much less. It's not as dreadfully simplistic as a Joytime 2 or as downright cringeworthy as a Memories Do Not Open, and the mixdowns are not anywhere near as muddy as some of the bass music projects we've gotten this year, like Keizo's Unleashed, Sullivan King's Show Some Teeth, Riot 10's Hyper Die Nightmares. This album isn't really hurting anyone by being a cheesy, feel-good, formulaic electropop album. Given, I still wouldn't say I love it in any capacity, but I did grow to appreciate it more just for what it is, and didn't discount it completely just because it's so formulaic. Beyond what I've already mentioned, there aren't really any overarching themes or concepts or anything like that going through the album, so I guess I'll just talk about it track by track from here. The intro track, fittingly titled Intro, is actually one of my favorite moments on the entire LP. Super powerful, kind of builds up, I guess, this album to be more than it is because it's so grand and almost like astronomically sized. Really, the only bone I have to pick with the intro is that I wish it transitioned better and more directly into All You Need to Know, because it kind of just cuts off at the end and then builds back up at the beginning of All You Need to Know, like they weren't even meant to be connected, which obviously they are. And speaking of All You Need to Know, that's actually surprisingly one of my other favorites on the album. A lot of you might know by this point that I have kind of a distaste for slander, but this is a really well put together song, and honestly it's cool to see Slander's, I guess, signature style, if you can say they have one, that you can at least recognize some of their elements, and in a track that the mixdown isn't just completely thin and lifeless like a lot of their stuff is. Super cheesy song, but hey, I never claim to dislike cheesy stuff all the time. The song actually gives me a very similar vibe to a lot of the melodic big room stuff I was listening to around 5 years ago, artists like Mance and Arston, albeit a more like future bassy melodic dubstep kind of take on that. I guess a more modern approach in the current EDM landscape. Dare I say it's also a really nice balance between the styles of Gryffin and Slander. On the other hand, still not all that thrilled by the collaboration with Seven Lions and Noah Kahan, Need Your Love. For me, one of the most uninspired collaborations I've ever seen come from Seven Lions. Really, his influence to me seems to go as far as the chord progression and then some of the like melodic, kind of pretty atmospheric pads in the background of the song, especially in like the build-up. But beyond that, there's really nothing all that thrilling about this song, and even like the off-drop sections remind me a lot of Beautiful Creatures by Illenium. Tie Me Down marks the start of the really pop-leaning songs on the album, and honestly, it's not a terrible place to start. It kind of has a little bit of that dance hall, tropical influence, and the vocal melody, you know, as I mentioned before, is really fantastic, although Can't really say I'm all that crazy about the lyrics, which seem to be about BDSM. Then we get into Nothing Like You in collaboration with Drulu. As you guys probably already know if you follow this channel, I'm a big fan of Drulu, really like their stuff, and honestly I think this song is maybe even a bit better than some of the recent stuff they've been putting out. It's more formulaic than usual, given, but the blend of the more poppy elements with Drulu's kind of signature production style, as well as some of their, signature instruments and plucks that you can hear in the background, especially prevalent in the drop, are just really enjoyable. It's not overwhelmingly Drulu, which having more of their kind of signature elements blended into the song may have been nice in order to kind of provide some variety to this album, but since it's not their project, I'm kind of okay with the amount of influence they have on the song. Remember is a fun little vocal-driven pop house type song in collaboration with Zohara. Reminds me a lot of, some of the other pop house stuff I've heard. It didn't really stand out to me all that much in that regard. Gorgon City, Duke Dumont, kind of that style stuff, but I really do like the vocal performance here. Zohara hit some impressively high notes, and I enjoy that aspect of it a lot, if nothing else. Body Back featuring Maia Wright is another deep house influenced type pop song, with Wright sounding a bit too close to BB Rexa for my taste, and lyrics that are a bit sexual but nothing over the top enough to really get my attention. Bye Bye is another one that's been kind of hard for me to get into, probably because it reminds me a whole lot of Feel Good. It's the same style, very similar chord progression and instrumental palette kind of going on in the song. Not really a lot to take away from it. On the other hand, the song If I Left the World with Marina and Model Child is maybe one of my favorite cuts from the album. Marina's got these deep, rich vocals that I just adore in the context of the song. I feel like he uses her vocals in a great way, and it just rolls off really nicely. Some kind of synthwave undertones that I think serve the song well too. Out of My Mind is another cool song, and maybe another potential favorite from the album. My biggest complaint about it is that it seems like the echo vocals kind of come out more powerful than the lead, which is weird for me. It's one of the few mixing moments on the album that I think are really questionable, but there's a lot of things I like about it too, especially going into the drop. I think the vocals are really nice and pleasant to listen to, and then it's got some orchestral undertones with a lot of strings that I think serve it really well, a fairly unique chord progression that I think makes it all the more of an interesting listen. Baggage is one that I really wanted to love, but I just can't bring myself to it. It's a collaboration with Gorgon City and Aluna George, and Aluna George, the latter of the two, is an act that I've typically really enjoyed in the past for vocal appearances, but I feel like it's just so toned back and bland for Aluna's vocals. This isn't the type of song that I really saw her doing, and it's sad because she's got a very unique voice, a very recognizable voice, and it just seems so stripped back in this song. Just for a Moment featuring Aislinn is another one that reminds me a lot of Illenium style, and that kind of drags my enjoyment for it down a little bit, but I do like some of the aspects of the vocals, and one of the few moments that I enjoy in the regard of wordplay is actually found on this song, where Aislinn says, "Pull Me Close, I Need Closure." OMG with Carly Rae Jepsen is another one that I'd say is one of the standouts on the album for me, while at the same time also being a pretty massive disappointment. Part of the reason I'd say it's my favorite is because Carly's voice definitely serves as a breath of fresh air when it comes to this album in terms of variety, but it's a major disappointment for me because, Carly Rae Jepsen is pretty much the queen of synth pop right now, and there's pretty much nothing synth poppy or kind of vibing, I guess I'd say, with her style on this song. It just feels like she's putting together a pretty standard vocal performance, nothing that absolutely is mind-blowing, and the lyrics, I'd say, are some of her weakest since, Call Me Maybe. You Remind Me is okay, I guess. It's another one of those deep house infused pop songs, and I really like the timbre of Stanaj's voice on this song, but the lyrics are just so underwhelming and repetitive. On top of that, someone in the comments section of the YouTube upload of this song was suggesting that the lyrics of this song are incestual, so even though I don't think they are, that's just like stuck in my head every time I listen to it now. Hurt People with Aloe Black is another situation like OMG with Carly Rae Jepsen, where I feel like Gryffin could have done a much better job kind of working with the singer's style instead of just having them deliver whatever top line. On another hand, the lyrics of the song are kind of confusing to me. At times it seems like it's about mental illness and kind of trying to bring awareness to that, but then at other times it kind of feels like a breakup song, but then it overall has kind of a happy tone to it, so it gives me all kinds of conflicting emotions, which doesn't make it a great listen for me. And then the album closes with Nobody Compares to You, which, if I remember correctly, is the first single that released off of this album. I'd say the song is another highlight on the album for me. It's a pretty cheesy melodic bass type song, but I feel like Katie Pearlman's vocals more than make up for it. I just adore her performance on this song, and kind of the deep bass lines that are going on in the drop are, I'd say, pretty unique to this style, which also made me enjoy it. It reminded me a bit of some of Tritonal stuff, but like, whatever. And then, yeah, I'd say the vocals are really the standout for me. It kind of makes up for any bad part of this song. And that pretty much brings us to a close here. Like I said, this album is pretty average. It doesn't seem like Gryffin is really pushing for all that unique of a style, which is fine, I guess. It's a halfway decent like electropop album, and it's not going to, I feel like, blow anyone's expectations unless they've never heard anything in this style before. But I feel like that instance is going to be pretty rare considering how much of this stuff we've gotten over the last few years in both pop radio and EDM. There are certainly highlights and moments of triumph on this album, but I feel like even the best moments aren't really comparable with some of the better electropop music that's coming out these days. Just my opinion. For Gravity, I am feeling a strong 4.5 to a light 5 out of 10. As always, if you guys haven't listened to this album yet and you'd like to, I have the Spotify link down in the description below. And if you have listened to this album, make sure to let me know what you think in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And anyway, I'm Landon Remixes, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.